Let's go now to the Swiss Alps and Davos. Our business editor, Stephen Carroll, reporting from the World Economic Forum. Stephen, Theresa May's big day in Davos.
Yeah, and really there wasn't much to be said about Theresa May's speech here in Davos. We heard a lot of the same themes that we'd heard when she spoke in that big speech in London on Tuesday. So many of the people here, of course, it had been one of the most waited for sessions at the World Economic Forum. People wanted to hear more about her plans for Britain in the world, and that had been something that we'd been expecting a little bit more detail on. She spoke a lot about her plans for including more importance about social inclusion after Brexit. She's talking about how the government needs to have more of a role with its business strategy to make sure that those people who felt left behind, those people who voted for Brexit, felt more included by the industrial strategy in the United Kingdom. So perhaps nothing major new out of the British Prime Minister's speech here, but certainly it was something that was very much expected or very much looked forward to by a lot of the attendees who wanted to hear more about her plans for the UK after leaving the European Union. We'll be hearing from the British Chancellor at a panel tomorrow morning as well, where there'll be more outlining of exactly what the country will look like after Brexit. Now, lots of issues up for discussion here. We're going to talk a little bit more about what's been going on in Davos. Philip Jennings is the Secretary General of Uni Global Union. Philip, thanks for being with us.
Hi, good evening.
Were you much impressed by Theresa May today?
I thought it was something of an empty vessel, actually. If you were looking for some pathways as to how the UK is going to find its way, negotiate its way from Europe into a new reality, then you wouldn't have been very much impressed, I think. And it was a kind of a Rule Britannia speech in some regards, that the future is a trade deal with the European Union. I mean, it's not very dramatic. And what it seems to indicate is that, quite frankly, there was no plan B, and they hadn't really thought through the consequences of this, and they still seem to be struggling to come up with a cohesive answer. If you look at the social realities in the UK as things stand, she talked about eliminating modern slavery in the world. That I think she should look closer to home. In the UK, 1 in 7 workers in work are in poverty. That makes 13 million people. The British worker is £40 a week worse off than he and she was before the crisis. And we expect that the economic consequences will be felt in the pocketbook by everybody. She talked about an industrial strategy, not bad. And that was basically about it. She talked about social inclusion. She did admit there was a society. So I suppose that's an advance on what Margaret Thatcher was. But it was a pretty flat, I thought it was a pretty flat affair, actually.
Do you find this year, you talk about inequality when we speak at this event every year, it's something that is more on the agenda now than it has been before after the events of last year. Are you finding people are more willing to listen to your message here in Davos?
Well, it's been reflected in the agenda to the extent that the theme was responsibility, and that indicates to us that there's been a great deal of irresponsibility. There's been a big play on income inequality, and we got the Oxfam report, but the work that's been done in the run-up to this confirms that that the level of inequality in the world of work is as bad as it's been since the 1920s. What is the most frustrating thing is you get bright, sharp, good political people and academic people, and they all scratch their heads and say, well, what is the solution? And the fact is that the solutions out there don't make the most comfortable of reading for the people here. Because the only way they're going to do this is by changing the tax code, number one, changing the purpose of business and corporate governance, number two, away from the short term, more into a more wider responsibility role. And then if you're going to start eating into economic inequality, then you have to give working people the power to negotiate. And that hasn't been the message of Davos here. But the reality is the living wage kind of crept into the conversation. Everyone seems happy with the minimum wage because it is the minimum. But the only way we're going to fix this is by broadening the voice of working people so that they have a voice on pay. I mean, the boards of directors have a say on the CEO pay, and they're extremely generous. Most working people don't have that opportunity to negotiate their wages and working conditions, and that's part of the fault line. Climate change has been big, and what has been particularly big is the future of work. Last year it was a bit of fantasy, it was one of those Davos moments, but this year I think the coin is really beginning to drop in terms of what this means to people's jobs. And
this is the idea of more automation and more technology replacing jobs.
The digital piece has begun to hit the harsh realities now. The research that's being done out there is dramatic. A direct hit on the level of employment, on the quality of employment, and the general sense is, well, our systems of schooling and education and reskilling aren't really equipped to face the wave of change that is in front of us. So it hasn't been a euphoric Davos. I think the Brexit vote has shaken people up. The Donald Trump vote has certainly shaken people up. Although, if you look at the front page of the financial press today, JP Morgan up 100%, Goldman Sachs up 100%. So what we're seeing is he's making Wall Street great again. We're still a way to see whether the American worker will have a great wage again.
Well, I mean, he was elected on a platform of doing more for American workers. Are you and your members expecting good things from him?
We have to wait and see. What have we seen until now? He promised to drain the swamp, his language about clearing the political decks and to have a new approach. He hasn't drained the swamp. He's building a marina for his rich friends. He's surrounded by millionaires and multi-billionaires. The person that he's nominated to become the Secretary of State for Labour has one of the worst records when it comes to labour law infractions. He's a fast food man, and they did a study of the fast food working practices. They found 78,000 infringements, and this guy, Mr. Puzder, was in 4th position. He's spoken against the minimum wage. He's spoken against collective bargaining. He set the task out to weaken the voice of working people, so that's not good. I like it when he talks about jobs and putting pressure on jobs, but it needs an economic plan to back it up. And the economic plan that we see is more voodoo economics, more trickle down. You cut taxes at the top, which will grow the inequality gap. You cut taxes at the bottom in the hope that that'll get the wheels turning. I hope the private investment will come back in big numbers, but it will need an economic plan to do it. We like what he's saying about infrastructure. We've been saying this for a long time, both in the sense of Europe and there, but we need to see the substance. But what is really worrying is this change in Obamacare without a plan B. 26 million Americans are being confronted with the reality that they're not going to have the health care coverage that they've had. And even more dark is the 2 million dreamers. These are the children of the undocumented workers who were born in America, lived in America, work in America, go to school in America, and they have this threat of deportation. So it feels like corporate America. He feels like a corporate president. He is a deal maker. And the fact is that he said that Wall Street would have a distance from him. In fact, Wall Street is dancing in the streets with the results that we've seen today. So he's going to be held to account by the trade union movement. What he has to do is to give power back to working people. The share of the wealth produced has gone more and more to the private sector. We've had record profits. We haven't seen this level of profits in the States in the last 30 years since the 1920s. And so there's a great deal of expectation amongst the people that he's going to do something for them. But to do that, he has to pull the levers of power in their direction. And also, and that doesn't seem to be happening yet. His inaugural speech is tomorrow. I'm eager to listen to it.
We'll have to see
if there's some milk and honey for the workers of America.
Okay, Philip Jennings from the Uni Global Union, thank you for joining us on France 24. Look at what's happening on the markets for you. Europe today, we saw small falls on the stock markets as the ECB kept monetary policy unchanged at its meeting. In the United States, shares on Wall Street down slightly as well ahead of that much-awaited inauguration speech tomorrow from Donald Trump. One more thing to look out for from Davos, the France 24 Davos debate broadcast at 2:10 GMT on taxation of multinationals. You'll hear the head of Oxfam say that tax dodging is now a human rights issue. That coming up in just a few hours on France 24. But for now, it's back to you, Francois.
All right, many thanks for that. Stephen Carroll reporting from Davos.